Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. John Schmeelk with you. We bring back one of the friends of the program, been joining us for years, Sam Monson, now with the 33rd team. Sam, before we get started, tell the folks where they can find your podcast with the 33rd team.
Yeah, it's the podcast show is now called Check the Mic, MIC, like microphone. So anywhere you get your podcasts or on YouTube, that's where we are.
Because you check the Mike linebacker. Get it, folks? It's a pun. Yes, it's good stuff. All right. So I know you're really concerned with the playoffs right now, and you're doing me a favor by kind of looking ahead to where, I don't know, 2/3 of the league is right now or 3/4 of the league is right now.
Right.
Where free agency is going to hit us in about a month and a half, give or take. And we were texting back and forth when we were setting this up. And the way you kind of started the conversation, boy, John, not a great year to be looking for players in free agency.
Yeah, and it's true for a lot of teams, right? You kind of look at some of the teams that are out of contention, some of the teams are already into the off season, and this was weeks ago, months ago, and you're like, well, the good news is they got a ton of cap space, they've got draft picks and all this kind of thing. Like the bad news is this is a terrible year to have a ton of cap space and free agent spending money because it does not look like a good free agent class. And it feels like we've been saying that, year on year for a while now, that it's kind of a rough looking free agent group. This is bad even by those standards. I think generally you're seeing teams getting better at, just operating within a salary cap and managing their roster. And, you're just not having the same level of player hit the open market as often as they used to. You used to have a ton of guys that were just going to hit the market because teams didn't want to give up those deals. Now I think they're prioritizing their own players. They understand where to spend the money, and you're just not seeing these marquee free agents hit the market as much.
Yeah, I think really your best bet now is find the teams that are paying a ton of money to a quarterback and find guys in non-essential positions that are hitting free agency that are really good. I mean, I guess Trey Smith would be an example with the Chiefs this year, right? He's pending a free agent. And those are the teams that I think really have to be a little bit more careful with how they spend, given they might have a huge expenditure at quarterback, maybe a highly paid offensive tackle, a highly paid wide receiver. Those are the teams where I think you're probably going to get your best chance here to maybe snag one or two guys that are legitimately really good players, but their current teams legitimately can't afford them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely always teams that have enough money tied up elsewhere, particularly at certain position groups. You can only spend so much on any given unit. So a team that's already thrown a ton of money at a particular area and has an upcoming free agent, there's a bigger chance that they're going to let that guy hit the open market just because they've already allocated so much money to that position group. Trey Smith with the Chiefs, I think, is a really good example of that. Would they want to let Trey Smith hit the open market? Almost certainly not. Might they have to because they've already given Joe Tooney big money. They've already given, Juwan Taylor big money. Creed Humphrey's there. Yeah, that becomes more likely then.
All right, so let's not bury the lead here. We'll be talking about quarterbacks all offseason for the Giants. The only guy they have the rights to this next year is Tommy DeVito. Everyone else is either free agent or gone. We've talked about the draft a lot. In free agency, I think my theory here, Sam, has been just throw as many darts at this position as you can. You can argue with the extent to which the Falcons did this with the amount of money they gave Kirk Cousins, but I like the theory. Veteran in free agency, rookie in the draft, bring the rookie in when he's ready. So let's look at the bridge potential quarterbacks in this free agency class. What do you think of this group in terms of who are some of the better targets the Giants might be able to go after?
Yeah, and bridge quarterback is obviously one term for it. The other way of looking at it is there's going to be a ton of reclamation projects, and we've got a couple of years now of sort of intriguing results from these reclamation project type quarterbacks. And right up until a couple of weeks ago, I think Sam Darnold was sort of the next Baker Mayfield, the next Geno Smith.
Yep.
And we're like, wow, suddenly maybe this is the way of actually finding quarterbacks. We find the last guy that was cast off and that didn't work for the team that drafted him, and we just rebuild that guy. And that's a better way of doing this than the draft entirely. And then, 2-week, 8-day implosion of Sam Darnold later. And it's like, well, okay, maybe that wasn't necessarily the way to do it. But I think Darnold.
Yeah, by the way, he's probably still getting $30 million a year this offseason from a team that's desperate for a quarterback.
Well, that's the thing. I think Darnold is still a really intriguing name because we had 15 games worth of really good, genuine, different type of Sam Darnold play. And then it's almost like somebody just pushed the reset button on him and he went all the way back to New York Jets Sam Darnold when it mattered most. The final two games of their
Back to
season.
the source code, Sam. Back to the source code. All the updates were just eliminated from the computer.
Yeah, like they just flashed his memory, right? Put him back to the original default operating system, and it didn't work anymore. But I think like he's still a really interesting name because there are going to be teams out there that do not get the quarterback, right? The Raiders won themselves out of contention. Maybe the Giants. Like there are going to be teams that are going to go, we're not in with a shot of these guys at the top of the draft. We're going to have to find something else to do. And maybe that's, Aaron Rodgers. That's the destination for one last go around for Rodgers. Maybe that's Sam Darnold as the most likely of these reclamation project quarterbacks to actually give you good play for any period of time. But I think he's an interesting name. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is an elephant in the room for these teams. Do you want to be hitching your wagon to Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career, given what he's just done? Absolutely not. Are you going to be desperate enough to do it anyway? Maybe. So Rodgers is an intriguing name for that reason. Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, one, if not both of those Pittsburgh quarterbacks are going to be available. Each one of them is an interesting name for slightly different reasons. So yeah, like there's going to be some interesting names out there at that quarterback spot.
I think for the Giants too, balancing how good you want this quarterback to be with the amount of money you're going to have to pay them is also part of this thing, right? You might think, oh yeah, Sam Darnold's our best choice here, but given where the Giants are, is Sam Darnold better at 30 or 35 million, or is Justin Fields better at 12 or 13? Again, I'm just throwing numbers out there where I think these
Right.
guys might land. So given, where the Giants are with their record, how much of a boost are you looking for with this veteran quarterback, given you probably want to spend some of that money elsewhere on the roster to fill some of the holes that they showed over the course of the last couple of years?
And do you just want, a legitimate bridge quarterback to some young rookie, right? Or to some young quarterback? Like Darnold was signed as a bridge for 1 year, $10 million, who could play if they needed him to. We might be able to get through a whole season with him, but realistically, he's in here for the first month of the season before we throw in JJ McCarthy. And towards the end of the thing, it was like Darnold might not play at all, right? JJ McCarthy might win this job right out of the gate and we're good to go. And then all of a sudden, he came out of a game and he's got a sore knee, and that became he's shut down for the year. And suddenly the keys are thrown to Darnold, and he's got to man the fort for the entire season. And it looked like that was going to go great. Like actually, towards the end, it's Darnold's franchise. Like he's won that starting job based off how he's played. And then in the space of 2 weeks, the whole thing evaporates and it disappears. And now we're trying to project where he goes, or if we can give some sort of halfway deal in Minnesota to keep him around. But such a mad roller coaster ride for him. But like he's had sort of three different projections in terms of what he was supposed to be on that team within 9 months. He was initially signed to just man the ship for a while, and then he played so well that he's going to be a long-term starter for them. And then at the very end of it, actually, maybe we sign him back to be a bridge again. So, if you're looking at a Russell Wilson or I think each one of these quarterbacks is maybe a slightly different, like medium, short, long-term type of option, even as a transition bridge, middle class type of quarterback deal that it obviously isn't, the next Patrick Mahomes home run that you're looking for. So I think each one of these guys fits a slightly different profile. If you're drafting Russell Wilson, I would say the less time you have him projected out as your starter, the better, right? He's going to be a bridge at this point to somebody new. If you're signing Justin Fields, like you might actually believe he can be your long-term answer still based off the couple of places he's played and what you think you could get out of him. And then, I mean, I'm kind of at this point, I have no idea what Sam Darnold is based off the last 9 months of his game.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does.
Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
I think the one guy I want to touch on specifically here, and then we can move to the next position, is Justin Fields, because I think he fits the profile of the Baker Mayfield, the Geno Smith, the Sam Darnold, where high draft pick, physical athletic skills are there, big arm, but hasn't really figured out how to play the quarterback position right. I think you had to be discouraged by what you saw from him in Pittsburgh and how much better the offense got when Russell Wilson took over. Now, that eventually faded away as teams, I think, figured out what they were doing with Russ and all that stuff. But I think that's the guy a lot of Giant fans are intrigued by because of his age, because of the tools. And look, this is only stop 3 for him, and people might laugh, but it took Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, and Sam Darnold like stop 4 or stop 5 to figure things out. So I'm just thinking your thoughts on Fields and how much do you really think is still in that tank, and how high that ceiling actually is for him, given the physical tools and what he's shown so far in the pros.
I think the ceiling is still very high. And one thing in his favor is that I think he has gotten better slowly, but incrementally every single year. Like every single year of his career has been slightly better than the year before. It's just that he started off so much worse than everyone was kind of expecting him to be, where at his draft time, Trevor Lawrence was being billed as a generational prospect, the best prospect since Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning or however far back you wanted to go. And there were still a bunch of people that were like, Justin Fields is 1A. Like he's right up there with Trevor Lawrence. And then, okay, Trevor Lawrence hasn't been as good as that billing, but Justin Fields has been nowhere near that when he was drafted. So even though he was getting better every year, it was still seen as a significant disappointment. But the running ability is special. Like it's up there with Lamar Jackson, with Jaden Daniels. Like it's transformative. It's the kind of thing that can prop up an offense and prop up a passing game and kind of keep the chains moving while you figure out the rest of things. The big problem, I think, is the plays where he just doesn't see it. And that's why Russell Wilson coming in changes the offense, because Russell Wilson will put the ball in the air and give George Pickens a chance to make a play down the field, whereas Justin Fields is still sort of there, paralyzed in the pocket, and eventually has to scramble and try and make something happen on the ground. If somebody can convince him to just trust his eyes again and just put the ball in the air and just fire, like just give it a chance, I think there's a big jump to be had in his game somewhere, but I don't know if you'll ever get him to do that. And that's the thing, is eventually teams are going to stop trying and they're just going to say, all right, this is what he is now. It's not going to improve. This is what you're dealing with. But I do think that as long as that is on the table, there is the potential, I think, that you could get a giant jump forward from him, like you got from a Geno Smith or like you got, from a Baker Mayfield. I think that there is that in there, and somebody's going to roll the dice on it, because if you do get that jump, suddenly you're not just talking about like a potentially viable bridge quarterback. You're talking about like a legit starter.
Now I'm with you. All right, let's jump to wide receiver. I'm going to push T. Higgins aside just because if he hits free agency, he's going to be so high at the top of the market. There's like 2 or 3 teams with the cap space to sign him. And then it's funny. If this was like 5 years ago, it would be like, oh my gosh, DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, they're all free agents in the same offseason. That's unbelievable. I can't believe it. But now all these guys are over 30. I'll throw Chris Godwin into the mix because he's coming off a major injury, much like Diggs is. And it's just a weird class. And I wonder how, first, there's been so many wide receivers drafted the last few years that teams are trying to build with these young guys on rookie contracts. And I wonder how much these older guys who still have something left in the tank and can be productive, how much they're going to demand on the free agent market, given all the tread that's off those tires.
Yeah, and that's the key, because it's T. Higgins who's the sort of one jewel in the crown, and then there's a bunch of guys that have like either issues, age concerns, a combination of both, and or we don't know how much money they're going to demand. So, DeAndre Hopkins has shown this year, like he can still play, he can still be a really useful part of an offense, and he's made a difference to the Kansas City Chiefs in the second half of the season. So, like if you're just given the option, do you want DeAndre Hopkins on your roster or not? Does he make it better? Like most teams would say, yeah. But if he also wants to do that at $15 million a year, it's like, that's where you start to get into that debate about whether the cost is worth it. So I think a lot of these receivers can still make an impact and still play, but it's going to come down to how much you actually want to pay these guys, and whether that part is worth it. I think that becomes a lot more debatable. So yeah, I think it's a tough spot for wide receivers because there's only really one sort of super clean prospect or super clean free agent that you're going to want to get into. Everybody else has like it's sort of which concern are you less worried about, and it's why again I think we've seen the last couple of years like the trade market has picked up for wide receivers. Teams are keeping hold of these guys until they are really flawed and they want to move on from them. and you're seeing, a Tyreek Hill or these guys start to move in trade talks, and maybe that's the place that a team starts to try and get their wide receiver instead of picking the bones of the old guys with injury concerns and all those things. You identify somebody you want that's reaching the end of a contract and you try and make that happen instead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. All right, let's jump to the offensive line quick here, Sam. I think inside there are some interesting names, guys coming off their first or second contracts that are in their mid-20s that I think are pretty good players. Mekhi Becton's been, reclamated by the Eagles. We'll see what he ends up doing. Tevin Jenkins is a guy with some guard tackle flex. I think he's an interesting player. He's had a bit of a roller coaster early part of his career. And then a tackle, I'm not quite as confident in what I'm looking at outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good summation of the class. It's definitely got some strong names inside the tackle class. I mean, Ronnie Stanley is an interesting name because I think at his best, he was one of the best pass blocking tackles in the NFL. Then injuries really hit him hard. I mean, he dealt with basically the same ankle injury for kind of 2 straight years. He came back really early. They almost rushed him back. And like the first game that he was back, he just didn't look like he was healthy at all. And that kind of set him back like another really extended period of time. So, but I think if you get Ronnie Stanley back and you can sort of get him back towards his best play, I think he's still a top tier left tackle and a guy that obviously that would leave you with the Giants is with 2 left tackles. One of them would have to flip to the right side, but he's definitely a guy with top tier play in his range of outcomes. Outside of that, I think you're right. Like the tackle class is significantly worse. Cam Robinson filled in well for the Vikings this year when they lost Christian Darrisaw, but he's again been a left tackle the whole way. I think the inside is definitely stronger, has more depth, and potentially more intriguing. You've also got, Mekhi Becton had his resurgence inside a guard. I mean, he was drafted as their left tackle, and he's now done his best work inside on the right side at right guard. So you've got that dynamic working as well. Maybe you could project Mekhi Becton backed out to a right tackle role based off what you thought about him at draft time.
Yeah, or maybe based on the Becton path here, do you project Evan Neal inside a guard and try to see if you can do with him what they did with Becton? So something to keep an eye on here.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help.
Make sense of your money with Citizens.
Real quick, Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, official bank of the Giants. Game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs. Big Blue fans can get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. All right, let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball there, Sam. I do think one area the Giants do need help is defensive tackle depth behind and, frankly, next to Dexter Lawrence. I think once Dexter Lawrence went out, we've seen the run defense the last 2 years, and just the interior pass rush, besides Dexter, has really not been there. We know kind of the waves of defensive tackles is the way a lot of teams have looked at this, and I do think there are some, again, interesting names of guys in their 20s at defensive tackle that actually fit pretty well against a big, powerful guy like Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, like it's actually an interesting group of kind of undersized, three-tech, pass rusher type of defensive tackles. Milton Williams is maybe the first name off that list. The Eagles pass rusher that's kind of, I think a lot of people really liked him at draft time as that mid-round, under the radar superstar type of player that could emerge and become a real force. And then obviously a guy like Jalen Carter comes in and just sort of shows the difference between an elite prospect and a guy like Williams. But Williams has really developed into that player over a couple of years. Adigi Zua as well for the Cowboys, I think, has kicked on and become that type of player. And then Uwuzurike for Detroit had a couple of years where he really didn't look like he was going to be anything. And again, finally has just hit the ground running this year in a contract year. So there's always that risk. But like those are 3 guys that are all pretty young, all pretty productive this year. And next to a guy like Dexter Lawrence, with the attention that he takes away from people, you can imagine any one of those 3 guys absolutely cooking on this defensive line.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Let's jump to the defensive backfield corner. And you could talk about the class too, but why don't we start with how you would approach the cornerback position when you're looking at free agent, Sam, because we know how volatile this can be. One year, a guy can be a top 5 corner. Next year, maybe he's the 25th best corner. It's just the way it goes year to year at that spot. So if you're attacking that quarterback position and you want to do it in free agency, the Giants already have a bunch of young guys. They need a veteran to kind of stabilize that group. How would you attack it and think about it when you are trying to improve that group in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, you have to just be aware that that is a risk, right? That you can be signing these veteran guys, and even if you have a really good guy, the good guy can have a bad year, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be a bad player. I'd be really intrigued in just bringing DJ Reed, keeping him in New York and bringing him across to the Giants. I mean, he's been a really, really good player for the Jets. And obviously, all the attention was on Sauce Gardner and how good he was right at the start of his NFL career. But DJ Reed has been playing spectacularly at various periods, and even his down years on that defense were pretty good. He's a veteran, he's established, he's got a lot of consistency in his game. And I think he's still young enough that you're not scared of this is the year he just goes off the cliff and he's not the same player again. So I think he ticks a lot of your boxes in terms of consistency, veteran presence, leadership, and young enough that you're not expecting him to just completely drop off the first year you sign him.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's interesting. A guy like, even guys like Byron Murphy, Asante Samuel, Carlton Davis, these are all guys in their 20s that I think, depending on what scheme you run, they've all had success in the league. And I think you still got to like where they are, that they have a lot left in the tank. And I don't think these are going to be top of the market, 20 million a year guys either. You can get them probably at a semi-reasonable price, kind of in the, who was the cornerback the Bengals signed over from Dallas that was good for them? The name escapes me, but a player kind of like that who's going to sit in, be a good starter, and isn't going to break the bank.
Yeah, you're right. Like, I don't think any of these guys are going to be hitting the top of the market. Like, none of them are the perfect clean prospect, right? That sort of 25-year-old that's already a star and is hitting the next big deal, and you're going to be trying to reset the market and hit that maximum best paid cornerback in the NFL deal. I think all those guys have already been re-signed by the team that drafted him. And you have the other guys. You have the guys that are either the next contract on and are still looking for another payday. But I think you're right. It's not, none of these guys are absolutely going to shatter the bank. You're going to have to pay them solid starter money, but you're not resetting the position.
Chidobe Awuzie was the name I was looking for there, kind of that solid starter. Safety class, what do you think of this group, Sam? Giants, they have Jason Pinnock as a free agent. They might want to try to make a move there.
Yeah, I think the safeties, it's a solid group. There's a lot of like big hitting type of safeties in this group. A couple of years ago, we got all the kind of free safeties hitting the market, and this year we seem to be getting more of the in the box roving strong safety robber type of safeties. Javon Holland, I think, is a potential superstar with Miami. I think he's had elite plays. Talanoa Hufanga for the 49ers. He's had a lot of injuries, but he makes a difference when he's on the field. And then you've got Cameron Bynum for the Minnesota Vikings, a guy that they love, and they've played a lot of those three safety packages. And he's been a significant part of that defense. I would imagine they want to keep him around because I think Harrison Smith is hitting the market as well, potentially, and is reaching the end of his amazing career for them as well. And you probably don't want to let that amount of your secondary hit free agency at the one time. But he's definitely an intriguing name that I would be looking at kind of bringing over and almost turning into the bigger name in my secondary as opposed to the forgotten guy within the Vikings defense.
All right, finally, before we say goodbye here, Sam, not even really giving me names of guys. If you're the Giants, you're sitting here with the third overall pick. You've had only 3 wins last year. The year before, the record was a little bit better, but the results still weren't good. How would you go about approaching free agency when you have over 40 million? You're gonna have a lot more next year. You don't have a quarterback on the roster. What would you be your approach to free agency this year if you were in Joe Schoen's shoes?
I think you want to just start eliminating weaknesses, eliminating massive problems on the roster. And the Patriots are a good example of this last year, right? They decided the Giants were on the phone. We want Drake May. We love this guy. We want to come up and draft and take him. We'll offer you this trade package. And eventually the Patriots like, no, we like him too. We're going to stick at this guy and take our quarterback. And it's like, okay, well, now you drafted your quarterback, and so far he looks like the guy. Like, Drake May looks fantastic. But it's like, how do you build around him now, right? You've got to find receivers and you've got to find offensive linemen because you have the worst offensive line and the worst receiving core in the NFL on paper. And they threw a ton of draft picks at that, and almost none of them look to be doing anything so far. Maybe they'll work out down the line, but their answer was to basically just shotgun that with draft picks and hope for the best. the Giants, I think, need to be like, okay, look, we've got some weak spots on this roster. Let's tick them off as much as we can. We don't need superstars. We don't need guys that are going to come in and completely revolutionize the position. We just need to be in a position where we don't have to draft the guy in the second round, the third round, and he needs to be okay. Otherwise, we're in trouble, right? We need to start trying to fill in those positions in free agency and just solidify spots that are problem areas right now.
Let me just follow up and then we'll say goodbye. Knowing that maybe it's not this year, but soon enough, you hope to be adding a young quarterback that's going to be your franchise guy long term, right? Do you put more resources into the offense to set that player up as best you can with protection and weapons so that whenever he gets here, he's not going into a situation like Drake May was going to last year, or other quarterbacks that have stepped into bad situations which hinders their development?
I think so. I mean, I think when you have a situation like that, I think number one, offense is kind of harder to piece together than defense anyway, because you need, 5 offensive linemen, 3+ receiving weapons,
Right.
all those kinds of things. So, if you have the young quarterback, you need the situation around him to be as good as you can get it. Otherwise, he's going to struggle. If you don't have the young quarterback, you have a veteran option who, by definition, is not as good as the other options. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had a shot at him in the first place. And that guy needs as much help as possible to be okay. So either way, you need to make the supporting cast as good as you can. And then if and when you find your quarterback, like, defense can kind of fall into place pretty quickly. You can get a couple players and suddenly just up the level of the defense a little bit. But the big needle mover is how the quarterback plays. So I think in all ways, you are better served trying to make the offense as good as you can make it. And then once everything's finally in place, right, now let's start attacking the defensive side a little bit, and dedicate our attention in that direction. So, yeah, I think the Giants would absolutely be best served. Let's try and fill in this offense as much as possible, whether or not we're getting our quarterback this time around, or whether or not we have to tread water and figure it out for a year. But let's fix all the weaknesses that we have.
All right, Sam, good stuff. Tell the folks one more time where they can find all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, check the Mike podcast either on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Good stuff, Sam. Talk to you soon, my friend. Are you going to be either at the Senior Bowl, Shrine, or Combine, or all three?
I think we're going to be at the Senior Bowl, the Super Bowl, and the Combine is the current plan.
Very good. I will see you in Mobile in a couple weeks, my friend.
Sounds good.
Sam Monson from the 3013 on the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. We'll see you next time, everybody.